the Museum of the Paris Prefecture of Police. In these showcases, we find the most incredible collection of objects from France's gruesome criminal history. The peephole through which Dr. Petiot watched his victims in their death throes, the cord used to strangle the bailiff, Goofy, and the oven Henry Longy used to dispose of his widowed victims. Knives, revolvers, clubs, these weapons were all used to commit the most abominable crimes. Starting in the 19th century, police began using science to solve their investigations, drawing on anthropometry, the study of the human iris, graphology, and morphophysiology. In the museum archives, investigation reports, interrogation scripts, and crime scene sketches will lead us along the bloody trail of the greatest murderers in history. (1920) is the beginning of the Roaring Twenties, and the French are starting to forget the carnage of the Great War, which caused more than 18 million deaths. In Paris, Montparnasse becomes the meeting place for intellectuals, and the Rotonde, the Doom, and La Coupole are always full. There you might bump into Ernest Hemingway, Scott Fitzgerald, or Henry Miller. André Breton, Louis Aragon, and Paul Éluard are dreaming up surrealism. Introduced by African-American soldiers, jazz stirs the souls of the masses. Popular shows, fashion, and sports become the main interests of the French, and newspapers give them increasing importance. Women are liberating themselves, and the feminist movement is growing. The right to vote is granted to the women in the United States. But in France, the bill proposed by René Viviani and Aristide Briand, passed by the National Assembly, is rejected by the Senate. In August 1920, a tragedy would involve a woman whose notoriety captivated the press. The saga of one of the most sensational criminal cases will divide public opinion, shaking feminists and strengthening supporters of sexism. On the 2nd of August 1920, Edouard Croix shows up at the police station of the Saint-Georges district in the 9th arrondissement of Paris. He's a driver, and he's worried about the absence of his employer, Monsieur Bassarabo, who had arranged an appointment with him on Saturday the 31st of July, as usual in front of his office at 67 Rue de la Victoire. What particularly concerns him is that since he has been in his service, he has become the businessman's confidant, and the latter often complains about his relationship with his wife. Recently, she even tried to strangle him. Given the apparent seriousness of the matter, it is the commissioner himself, Monsieur Thierry, who takes the statement. The driver explains that having heard nothing from his employer, he went to the premises of the Franco-Mexican Mining and Oil Company, where the employees are also worried about the director's absence. He then went to his home at 3 Square La Bruyère, where his wife told him that her husband had left suddenly for urgent business in Evian. However, Monsieur Bassarabo had a very important appointment on Saturday morning in Paris. Commissioner Thierry decides to go to La Bruyère Square. The door is locked, but the concierge is chatty. She tells him that on Saturday, she saw Madame Bassarabo, helped by her daughter, loading a large trunk into a taxi. She heard her tell the driver to take her to the Gare du Nord. Continuing his investigation, the commissioner goes to Rue de la Victoire, to the premises of the Franco-Mexican Mining and Oil Company. The director is still absent, and one of the employees tells him that he hasn't been seen for several days. He also says that Madame Bassarabo would often come to the offices and make a big scene, acting in an extremely violent manner towards her husband. He adds that she had come recently and said that the boss had gone to Nancy. Georges Bassarabo had rather complicated and tangled business affairs. 2 companies, one of which was well established in Paris, the Franco-American Export Trading Company on Rue de la Victoire, with 3 employees. There, he traded by selling surplus from the British and American armies. He sold a bit of everything: chateau, fuel, spirits. To buy these products in the first place, he borrowed money, and it was with the profits he made that he ran his businesses. The problem was that most of the time, his ventures didn't generate enough profit, and he was heavily in debt. The next day, back at La Bruyère Square, the commissioner learns that despite their heavy debts, the couple recently bought a villa in Montmorency. Perhaps they are there. As the police are leaving to go there, they unexpectedly come face to face with Madame Bassarabo, accompanied by her daughter. The commissioner doesn't give her the opportunity to ask him questions, and instead bluntly asks about her husband's whereabouts. "My husband is traveling," she replies. "Whereabouts?" the commissioner insists. "I can't tell you exactly where he is at the moment, but I'm not worried about it. It's very normal for my husband to be away on business and pass through multiple towns without stopping. It's absolutely impossible for me to give you his address." So the officer pulls another card from his sleeve and asks to see the trunk that the 2 women had sent to the Gare du Nord in Paris. "I'm sorry, Commissioner, but it is physically impossible for me to show you that trunk. I was meant to take it to Montmorency, but following my husband's instructions, I diverted it from its original destination. I can, however, show you the letter in which Monsieur Bassarabo asks me for it." She then shows him a blue note on which is written, "Please load the trunk at Gare de l'Est for Nancy." "In what circumstances did you send this trunk?" the commissioner continues. Madame Bassarabo's answer is somewhat confused, explaining that through absent-mindedness, she first asked the driver to take it to the Gare du Nord. Then, realizing her mistake, she asked him to take it to the Gare de l'Est. But as the taxi driver refused, she had to load the trunk onto another vehicle to get it to its destination. There, she bought a 3rd-class ticket to Nancy and checked in the trunk. "Do you have the receipt?" the commissioner asked. "I must admit, I'm very absent-minded and left without thinking to ask for it," she replied. Finding her explanations somewhat far-fetched, the commissioner asks the 2 women to remain at La Bruyère Square so that they can be available during the investigation. Commissioner Thierry then goes to the Gare de l'Est. He quickly finds the clerk, Jean Dulage, who registered the trunk. Dulage gives the following account. "I must tell you, the contents of the hat box seemed rather strange to me. It sounded as if there was a body inside, moving about. I even thought I heard a metallic noise, like a brass button scraping against the side. I informed my superiors, but since there was no bad smell coming from the trunk, they told me to load it onto the luggage van." Commissioner Thierry therefore alerted the head of the judicial police, Monsieur Ducrot, who immediately sent 2 inspectors to Nancy. The trunk was still there, at the left luggage office. It was a khaki hat box, measuring 58 centimeters wide, 80 centimeters long, and 48 centimeters high. It had 2 locks, which were not fastened. On each side, there was a wire handle. On one of these, a label was attached that read, "Madame Garnier, Nancy Station." The trunk was tied up with a long 6mm cord that ensured the package remained shut. In the presence of the public prosecutor and the Central Commissioner of Nancy, the trunk was opened. They open the trunk, and inside they discover Bassarabo's body. Bound, which had been in the station storage room for 4 days at the height of summer. It was difficult, actually, to get the body out. It took 5 men to remove it from the trunk. It was Georges Bassarabo, identified by his brother, who had come to Nancy specifically to identify him. Mr. Chardlon, the public prosecutor, Mr. Bonan, the investigating magistrate, Commissioner Thierry, accompanied by several inspectors, and the station official from the Gare de l'Est, Mr. Dulage, all went that same day to Madame Bassarabo's residence. The SNCF, French National Rail employee, immediately recognized the customer who had brought the trunk. She was the older lady who came to check in the hat box, he said. There was no longer any doubt. Madame Bassarabo had murdered her husband. When questioned about the circumstances of the tragedy, she initially denied her husband's death. I have no idea, gentlemen, what has become of my husband. But surely his corpse is in that trunk in Nancy, the investigating magistrate retorted. Oh no, there must be some mistake. That trunk contained only documents, Madame Bassarabo insisted. The magistrates felt that the presence of her daughter, who had remained silent until then, was unsettling her mother's testimony, as she refused to confess her terrible crime in front of her. The magistrate told Madame Bassarabo that she must confess now. If you don't confess, you will go to prison, and your daughter will be sent to Saint-Lazare prison with the public girls, women incarcerated for prostitution offenses. It was at that moment that Madame Bassarabo said she wanted to confess and take full responsibility. In a way, she was sacrificing herself for her daughter. And, as she explains, last week, on Friday night, my husband came home around midnight. My daughter opened the door to him, but she didn't speak to him and immediately went back to her room. We had just gone to bed. I heatedly accused my husband of having spent the evening with one of his mistresses. He flew into a mad rage and seized me by the throat to strangle me. I struggled and grabbed a revolver placed on a chair within my reach, and I shot. A moment later, I realized that my husband was dead. The next morning, Saturday, I wrapped the body in a raincoat and sent my daughter to fetch a trunk from the 7th floor without telling her what I intended to do with it. While Paul was out, I tipped the trunk over and slid the body inside. Then my daughter and I carried the trunk downstairs and loaded it into a taxi. You know the rest. I got rid of the revolver by throwing it into Lake Onguillon. As for the pillow on which my husband's head had rested all night after his death, soaked in blood, I took it to Montmorency and burned it at the villa. Having confessed to the crime, the two women were taken to the Judicial Police headquarters. It was then young Paul's turn to be questioned, and in tears she recounted what had happened. On the Friday night, I was woken up by the sound of a gunshot. Frightened, I rushed out of my bed and ran to my mother's bedroom door. She stopped me, saying not to enter, that it was just a gas explosion from the hot water tank. Nevertheless, I thought I saw in a mirror a body lying in the room. I went back to bed, but struggled to sleep as I felt overwhelmed by a painful sense of dread. The next morning, my mother called me and said, "What was bound to happen has happened. There's a trunk in the attic. Go get it and bring it here." When I returned, my stepfather's body was already wrapped in packing cloth. I helped my mother place it inside the trunk. I accompanied her to Gare de l'Est. At Nancy, Dr. Parceau, the city's forensic pathologist, the head and deputy head of the police, the president of the court, and the dean of the medical faculty were present at the autopsy carried out by the eminent forensic expert who had arrived from Paris, Dr. Paul. The cause of death was quickly established. Near the right ear, the pathologist found a rounded fracture in the bone, encircled by what appeared to be a tattoo-like mark, an imprint caused by the blast of gunpowder. Bassarabo had been killed by a point-blank shot to the head. For the press, the Bassarabo case, initially known as the Bloody Trunk Affair, according to the headlines at the time, and which very quickly became the Bassarabo case, misspelling from Bassarabo, was a godsend. It was the height of summer, and the Landru case, which had long dominated the headlines, was somewhat on hold since it was being investigated by the same judge who is now handling Madame Bassarabo's case. This made it a golden opportunity for the press, a godsend because at the time the press lived off of news stories. This was fierce competition between newspapers, and it was all about who could attract readers with eye-catching headlines, scoops that were more or less verified, photographs and sketches. The case immediately struck people as rather curious, primarily because of the method used. Landru's stove had been replaced by Madame Bassarabo's trunk, an unusual modus operandi involving two women, a mother and daughter, sending a corpse to Nancy in a trunk. Moreover, Madame Bassarabo's own personality soon caught the attention of the press. The two women were imprisoned at Saint-Lazare prison in Paris, whilst awaiting the conclusion of the investigation, which was set to be a lengthy process. Judge Bonon would indeed have to conduct a thorough inquiry to verify all the claims made by Madame Bassarabo and her daughter Paul. Forgetting their initial confessions, the two women now told him that the corpse found in the trunk was not that of Georges Bassarabo, and that he was in fact a spy living in New York. "But why did you declare that you had killed your husband?" Mr. Bonon then asked. "There is a secret I cannot reveal," replied Madame Bassarabo with a mysterious air. The judge then turned to Mademoiselle Paul and asked, "What do you have to add to that?" "I am innocent. My mother is innocent just as I am. The culprit, look for them, you will find them, but it is neither me nor my mother," the young woman said. "But then, who is the murderer?" the judge asked Madame Bassarabo. "I have no obligation to tell you. It is not my role to shed light on justice. My husband moved in dubious circles. Look at those corrupt circles. There has been disputes with other businessmen. Besides, his mistresses often complained about him. Could one of them have taken revenge? I have my own opinion, but I'm keeping it to myself." Judge Bonon also inquired about the alleged documents that were supposedly contained in the trunk. Madame Bassarabo offered this explanation. "They are manuscripts, books on strategy, organs, tubes, aircraft bombing plans. All of this seemed very suspicious to me. The items bearing manufacturing marks that were neither French nor Allied. I was all the more anxious because my husband, raised in Vienna, spoke German better than French. There were inventions such as a lasso to catch aircraft gondolas and flying cars." Faced with these wild claims, Judge Bonon filed away his dossier, while the two women's lawyers exchanged looks of dismay. Madame Bassarabo had an overflowing imagination, although this was hardly surprising given that she was also a woman of letters who, under the name Héra Mirtel, wrote columns for the press, poetry, collections, and novels. Born on the 24th of October 1868 in Lyon, Marie-Louise Victoire was the daughter of a canvas merchant, Antonin Grouet, originally from Fouilloux, a small hamlet in the Ubaye Valley in the Hautes-Alpes. When he arrived in Lyon in 1856, he partnered with another canvas merchant to set up a small business.
It was a close-knit, loving family overall, especially on the father's side, who was indeed very emotionally present. So I suppose you can say, as she said herself, that she was happy. And yet, on the other hand, there was another side to this life. First and foremost, the father was often deeply depressed because he knew that his business, the company he had come to establish in Lyon after leaving the Ubaye Valley, was failing, and he was greatly struggling to support his family as a result of this.
The silk industry is at its peak. The city is booming, and Antonin works hard to establish himself. Unfortunately, competition is fierce. His business collapses, and he dies on the 21st of April, 1887, leaving his wife, his son Antoine, and his 3 daughters, Adrienne, Marie, and Louise, burdened with debt. Despite all his efforts, Antoine, Louise's brother, is unable to save the family. He eventually sells it for a pittance and goes into exile in Mexico, where his uncle, Felicion, and many others from the Ube Valley, the Gruet family's place of origin, have also settled.
So, the Ube Valley, also known as the Barcelonnette Valley, developed a significant travelling merchant trade which reached its peak during the modern era, the 17th and 18th centuries, but which by the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th was beginning to wane and needed new markets. So, attention turned to the Americas. The people of the Ube Valley settled in Louisiana because they spoke French there and the culture was French. From Louisiana, it was easy for them to imagine expanding into Mexico, especially since France's presence in the Americas shared a border with Mexico at the time, the Texas territory, before Texas was sold by Mexico to the United States. Crossing over was therefore quite straightforward during this period. A major event occurred in 1810, when Mexico declared its independence and expelled the Spanish, who had been there for 3 centuries. Mexico welcomed, let's say, all other European entrepreneurs with open arms, especially for the French. France had always been a highly regarded country, and French culture was much admired in Mexico.
The community, now known as the Barcelonnette, quickly found their place, and the small drapers' shops they had built upon arrival soon gave way to much grander buildings.
The Barcelonnettes come and go, attending world fairs and developing a desire to establish the kind of department stores that France was famous for. So in around 1889 or 1890, the first department store appeared. It was called the Palacio de Hierro, translated as the Iron Palace. Indeed, all the infrastructure, materials, supplies and plans all came from France, while Mexican engineers on site managed the construction. And to control not just sales, but also production, they quickly sought to master the industrial process, setting up factories and taking over existing ones. In fact, they started large spinning mills, one of which was still operational into the 21st century, as late as 2018.
Mexico is seen as El Dorado, and the first Barcelonnette returned to their valley wealthy, where monumental villas begin to rise amid the mountains.
It was very important, not only to display their newfound wealth, but also to show a genuine attachment to their homeland. I really like the phrase from the academic Henri Bordeaux, who said, "These lives have meaning between the cradle and the grave." As long as they own splendid villas on the Côte d'Azur or grand apartments, even entire buildings on Avenue Foch in Paris, they needed nothing more. But the villa in Barcelonnette truly symbolised the return to their roots, a reconnection, a way to maintain that link with their origins. This is actually demonstrated by the fact that most of the time, the villa was built alongside a family tomb. Even if there was no villa, there was a tomb. This is why there is such an astonishing heritage in the Ube Valley.
While Antoine is trying to establish himself and make a fortune in Mexico, his mother and sisters are waiting patiently in Lyon for a sign from him to join them.
At this point in Louise's life, something important happened. She took charge of her family. She began doing odd jobs, working in documentation centres, some which were connected to the clergy and religious orders she was familiar with. She also took on other small jobs in shops and the like, much to the dismay of her brother, who heard about this while in Mexico. But she said to him, "You have to make a living somehow." What she discovered during this time, which is interesting, was that she was capable of running a family, supporting them, and earning her own living. So during this period, she really did take on thankless work. She often spoke of the contempt she faced from women, despite believing they were from the same social background. The positive side of this period, however, was that she realised that even though she didn't participate in Lyon's social life, a great deal was happening there, especially protest movements. There was even the beginning of discussion about the role of women in society.
In 1894, Antoine, who has now been away for 6 years, is now earning enough money and asks his family to join him in Veracruz.
He had finally managed to establish his textile business within this Mexican context, where, with the support of the dictator, Porfirio Diaz, a true French economic empire was being built. It was essentially economic colonization, where people like Antoine Gruez, his uncles, and other families from the Alpes de Haute-Provence were able to develop their own enterprises.
Louise is 26 when she arrives in Mexico. The success of the Barcelonnette is remarkable, but what fascinates her most is the dazzling country itself.
For Louise, Mexico is both a land of blessing, which she comes to adore, and at the same time, it also marks the beginnings of her downfall, or her death. The end of her life is already taking shape during this period. The most positive aspect is that she truly fell in love with the country, and she is one of the few women, perhaps the only one in this Mexican context, to have spoken about Mexico and explored its culture and the figures who shaped its history. She also has a remarkable gift for building strong relationships, making contact with Mexicans and visiting their communities to see how they lived. She experiences all of this very intensely.
In 1897, Louise is 29 and still single, while her younger sister, Marie, is already married. Pressured by her brother, who is uneasy about his sister becoming an object of desire in this male-dominated world around her, she ends up marrying a certain Paul Jacques.
And aside from her father's death, this was the most tragic thing she experienced, being forced into marriage by her brother, Antoine, who at some point began to fear the extent of his sister's behaviour. You know, the freedom she had, it worried him a lot. He is fearful for the family's reputation, so he finds a husband for her. This was something she could never have imagined, and she has to endure it. She marries a man from the Barcelonnette community, since marriage was usually within their circle. And the gentleman is a good family man, respectable in every way. He is wealthy, hard-working, has also built his own empire in the textile business, owns several shops, and so on and so forth. It was considered an excellent match, except he was about 20 years older than Louise, and she was subjected to this union.
1 year after her marriage, Louise gives birth to a daughter, Paul. This first child transforms her completely. A profound and enduring love binds her to this tiny new life. Louise is now thriving within the Barcelonnette society. With money at her disposal, she visits the salons of the affluent colonial families. In 1900, it's in Paris that she welcomes her second daughter into the world. Having returned with her husband, the couple settled at 7 Boulevard Carnot in La Vézinay. After spending 6 years in Mexico, the City of Light, which had been the subject of much discussion among the high society women in Mexico, had an irresistible allure for her. She longs to become truly Parisian. When her husband returns to Mexico to attend to his affairs, she feels free at last to live the life she wants. In 1901, Louise takes up residence in the capital, initially in a modest hotel on Rue de Varenne, before moving to an apartment on Avenue de la Tour Mabou, situated between Les Invalides and Les Champs de Mars. Determined to carve out a place for herself in Paris's intellectual circles, She begins with dogged determination a career as a columnist and then as a writer, adopting the name Héra Mirtel.
She abandons the name Louise Gruez and starts going by Héra Mirtel, signing all her works with that name. But why Héra Mirtel? Well, it's actually a name she discovered, or rather was suggested by a friend when she arrived in Paris and became involved in feminist movements. It refers to Greek mythology, where Héra is the name given to Zeus's wife. Héra also symbolises fidelity as the primary value in a couple's relationship, which suited Louise well. Despite having lovers, she has always sought that absolute, total and utterly clear and sincere love. So that was it for Héra. As for Mirtel, there are more questions about the choice of this name. It's perhaps because it evokes the myrtle plant, which also features in mythology, appearing in sculptures or depictions of gods, where these plants surround them. Myrtle is also a symbol of peace.
Deeply influenced by feminism, she becomes a committed activist. In 1905, together with Jean Odo Duflou, president of the French group of feminist studies, she founds L'Entente, a newspaper created by women, and becomes its editor. In 1912, she meets Robert Vezier, a talented writer with whom she immediately falls in love. Although he is married, his attraction to Louise is overwhelming, and they embark on a passionate affair. Meanwhile, her husband is going back and forth between Mexico and France, and every time they see each other, their reunions are filled with arguments and recriminations, with Paul accusing his wife of being a bad mother, a poor homemaker, and leading a dissolute lifestyle. This image stands in stark contrast to the Gruet family, a devout Catholic family known for its solidarity and charity. Indeed, on the 5th of August 1912 in Lyon, Eulalie Gruet, her brother Antoine's wife, who has also returned from Mexico, gives birth to their 5th child, a boy named Henri-Marie Joseph Gruet. Louise thus becomes the aunt of the man now better known as Abbé Pierre. Did Abbé Pierre know about the Bassarabo case? The evidence would suggest yes. When Louise was convicted, he was 10 years old. One has to understand what the Bassarabo affair and Louise Gruet's sentencing meant for the family. It was a terrible ordeal. The family was publicly shamed, the children were pointed at, and most certainly the future of Abbé Pierre, Henri Gruet, was made aware of it and in some ways was a victim of the scandal. In 1913, the violence of the Mexican Revolution is raising fears of the worst. Paul Jacques describes a country ablaze. Pancho Villa's troops are attacking large landowners and businesses. He witnesses one of his own shops go up in flames, and looters ransack all that remains. Meanwhile, Zapata's forces continue their fight against President Victoriano Huerta, who has been installed by the Americans in place of the dictator Porfirio Diaz. The end is nigh for French interests. Paul decides to return to Paris for good. He longs to regain a peaceful life with his wife and 2 daughters, but Louise is not ready to change her lifestyle. Paul's businesses are not improving, and he feels rejected at home. On the 5th of March 1914, he commits suicide by shooting himself in the head, leaving a letter on his desk explaining why.
When her husband died, worn out and broken by the troubles in Mexico, she wrote a very, very moving poem. But I believe it was also perhaps more a way to defy the family, to say, I am his wife, after all, and I will inherit from him. She had not lost sight of that. and therefore she composed this very beautiful poem, which she had engraved on a large stone placed on Paul Jacques' grave, which you can see in the Mélazine cemetery. On the grave, she addresses him as "my dear husband." She's playing the game that it was perhaps the only time she ever wrote "my dear husband," and she surely didn't think it. Or perhaps it was because he was dead. It's a bit cynical, but I think she also had that cynical streak.
Now free once again, she decides to return to Mexico to reclaim the assets her husband has left behind. She sets off with her 2 daughters, not knowing how long she would stay. No sooner does she arrive than she learns that on the 1st of August 1914, war has been declared against Germany, and the Barcelonnette at the port of Veracruz are returning to France to take part in the fighting.
She is very poorly received by her family, who see her as someone coming effectively to seize Paul Jacques' fortune, an image that she fails to shake off throughout the rest of her life, and even beyond. She confronts her own family, her in-laws, as well as revolutionary groups. At one point, she recalls being trapped during a train attack. She escapes more or less unharmed, but on top of all that, she has to battle the entire Mexican bureaucracy. No easy task in a country in complete chaos. There's no doubt that she was a strong woman, but she was always searching for love. She is also someone who loved to charm, to be noticed, to be cared for. By great misfortune, she meets someone, a man, Bassarabo, who looks after her and helps her get through this administrative and family mess.
Georges Bassarabo is an elegant man in his 50s, a wood, copper, silver, and oil dealer. He offers his services and advice to the young widow, who regains a sense of joy. Living in a villa surrounded by luscious vegetation, she has a household staff and is welcomed into the circles of high society, happy to receive a woman of letters arriving in Paris. Georges Bassarabo is attentive and quickly becomes indispensable. On the 25th of December 1915, she marries him. In 1917, the couple and Louise's 2 daughters returned to France, arriving in Bordeaux. On the platform, some police officers stop them, searching for a certain Weissman. George shows him his papers, at which point Louise learns that her husband's real name was Ishmael Weissman and that he's Jewish. The routine police inquiry ends there, but Louise is shocked to discover her husband's true identity under such circumstances. Georges Bassarabo, whose real name was Ishmael Jacob Providence Wiseman, was born in Batachnani, which is now part of modern Romania, in 1867. It was his father, Maurice Wiseman, who adopted the name Bassarabo at that time, because Maurice Wiseman was working in Russia at the time. He was working for the company Herman La Chapelle, selling steam equipment, notably for agriculture. At that time, Russia was plagued by pogroms. Being Jewish himself, to avoid becoming a victim of these violent attacks and discrimination, he adopted the name Bassarabo, perhaps in reference to the region of Bessarabia. Let us remember that Anna de Noailles was princess of Bessarabie. After arriving in Paris, the couple settle into an elegant apartment at 3 Square La Bruyère in the 9th arrondissement. Georges Bassarabo opens the offices of the Franco-Mexican Mining and Oil Company at 67 Rue de la Victoire. Louise, or rather Héra Mirtel, quickly reconnects with the circle of literary friends she left behind during her 3 years in Mexico. On the 8th of May 1917, her youngest daughter marries a young man from Mexico whom she had met there. The witnesses are all from the world of arts and letters. Despite the war, fighting, hunger, and poverty affecting the poorest, Parisian high society continues to enjoy itself, Parties and shows follow one after the other, and Louise organizes literary evenings in her apartment that is able to hold 300 people with the doors removed.
People used to read her poems, her texts, and perform plays. It was an environment where people listened, critiqued, and there was also a lot of gossip circulating in this slightly closed Parisian circle. And for example, Paul, who had also been raised in the arts, played the piano and gave recitals. There were also singing recitals, tenors, and so on. She welcomed people into her salon who boasted about spiritualism, who engaged in table turning. At the time, this was very sought after. And all of a sudden, there was this need to think about the afterlife. It was not necessarily in a religious way, not necessarily about God or anything like that, but more about what lies beyond death, the dead, and where are they? Maybe they surround us, this ghostly world. There was also a growing body of literature that strongly emphasized this.
On the 11th of November 1918, the armistice is signed thanks to American support. Germany is defeated and life can resume. But things are not going so well in the Bassarabo household. Louise is beginning to see through her husband's game. He married her to gain social status and financial security. Georges, on the other hand, sees his wife as an extravagant spender who uses her money on what he considers to be frivolous things, art, literary soirees, and the swarm of intellectuals who invade her salon. Nothing is going right, and the debts are piling up. These financial problems literally poison their life. Georges can no longer stand his wife and goes to seek the comfort that she refuses him in the arms of others. Louise quickly realizes her husband's dissolute lifestyle. She confronts him in memorable scenes, even at his company offices, hurling her contempt towards this man she hated. On the night of the 30th to 31st of July 1920, she can no longer bear the union and commits the irrevocable act. The investigation lasted 2 years, and the judge concluded that the motive for the crime was to seize the entirety of a 600,000 franc commission that the victim was supposed to receive. Indeed, Mr. Bassarabo had helped the Olivier Company secure an option on an oil concession in the Oaxaca Valley in southern Mexico. He was supposed to receive that money and had promised his wife 100,000 francs. Had she deemed that insufficient? The trial is held on the 8th of June 1922 at the Paris courthouse. The presiding judge is Councillor Gilbert. President Gilbert was the same judge who had presided over the criminal court in Versailles during the Landru trial, which had left him with very bad memories. Landru had managed to manipulate the public, if not the jury, making the audience laugh with his very particular sense of humor. This time, the Minister of Justice decided there would be no women. There would be no women nor photographers in order to avoid scandals. From the start, it was striking to see that Madame Bassarabo, a feminist, was being judged before an all-male audience by an all-male jury, since all jurors at this time were men, and defended by a male lawyer. Madame Bassarabo is defended by Maître de Moreau Giaffri, while her daughter Paul is represented by Maître Raymond Hubert. It becomes quickly apparent that the exchange between the magistrates and the accused is falling on deaf ears, with Madame Bassarabo retracting her confession, denying all involvement in her husband's death, and renewing her accusations of espionage. "I never put my husband in the trunk. I put documents in there. I don't know who or how they were substituted for his body." Louise has an answer for everything, not hesitating to speak or even control her daughter's testimony. At the second hearing, there is a dramatic twist. Paul Jacques, the daughter, says, "There is a secret. You will learn this secret later." and her mother stands up and tells her in Spanish, "Cállate, be quiet." This moment, captured by all the courtroom sketch artists, sets the tone for the trial. The mother, with a secret to hide. The daughter, who is dominated and forced to keep silent. Throughout the trial, this image endures, at least until the end, of a domineering mother who speaks out of turn and struggles to provide clear explanations about the case concerning her and the criminal facts, who tries to defend herself, and a daughter who remains discreet, keeps quiet, and appears completely dominated by her mother. And all the press reporters and court observers ask themselves, what is this secret? And they await its revelation. For 11 days, Madame Bassarabo puts on a spectacle, sometimes playing the tragic figure, sometimes aggressive, sometimes despondent. Throughout it all, she maintains her innocence in the crime without ever revealing the mysterious secret. On the 17th of June, 1922, the lawyers begin their closing arguments, trying to convince the jurors. First up is Maître d'Orville for the prosecution. These two women killed a man at dawn to rob him. They trampled on his corpse to cram it into a trunk, which they then shipped as far away as possible in order to delay the discovery of the crime. This dead man, they have dishonored him. They have dishonored his family. This family entrusts you with what it holds most precious, its honor. Then it is the turn of the public prosecutor, Maître Moncel, who argued that the daughter was just as guilty as the mother. Now, which of the two killed him, the mother or the daughter? What can we conclude after so many contradictory confessions and retractions? No doubt should remain in your minds, gentlemen of the jury, neither the question of guilt nor of premeditation. Before you are two co-authors of the same crime, which they planned and executed together. They killed for money. They have no excuse. Why would you grant them the charity of mitigating circumstances? Maître de Montjoie tried to sow doubt regarding the guilt of the two women, and concludes his defense by asking for acquittal. You will acquit, gentlemen of the jury. You never risk by absolving. In justice, there is no middle ground. He who does not judge well, judges badly. One does not judge based on a single act, but on an entire life. Married to a man who took her fortune, who deceived her, betrayed her. She suffered. A judge who is certain of such inner suffering, if he does not forgive, woe to him. Then it was Maître Raymond Hubert's turn, who pleads to spare from prison, or even the ultimate punishment, a young woman who was called a criminal, but was nothing but a martyr. At that moment, there's a dramatic twist. President Joubert, in a very gentle and careful tone, asked Paul, "Do you have anything to add?" And that's when the surprise arrives. Paul says, "Yes, I will tell you the truth." Sobbing and in tears, she eventually says, "I witnessed the murder, or rather, I heard the gunshot. I tried to enter my mother's room, which was locked with a key. She then opened the door for me. I heard gargling sounds. I heard footsteps. I saw a shape on the bed. That's all I saw." Then her mother asked her to bring down the trunk, and with just the tips of her fingers and a lot of hesitation, I helped to put the body in the trunk. Maître de Montjoie, sensing that this testimony would condemn his client, asked the young girl, "Did you see your mother kill anyone?" Then, turning to the jurors, "Is she even in a state to answer? The confession of a co-defendant means nothing. Woe to justice if in a trial like this the jury decided, 'I believe the one who cries the best.'" Maître Raymond Hubert Pointing to Paul, who is on the verge of fainting, adds, "Gentlemen of the jury, you will save this martyr." The jury withdraws and deliberates for 50 minutes. The verdict is quick. Paul is acquitted, but her mother is sentenced to 20 years of hard labor. Madame Bassarabo then exclaims, "From the bottom of my heart, gentlemen of the jury, thank you. Thank you for acquitting my daughter." On 22nd June 1922, Paul leaves the court free, while her mother is transferred to the women's prison in Rennes. By 1930, Louise is very ill, suffering from respiratory and cardiac pains, and is bedridden most of the time. On 20th March 1931, she's admitted to Hotel Dieu in Rennes. She dies there the next day at the age of 63. A mystery surrounds Louise Grouet's grave. On the 25th of March 1931, the hearse leaving Hotel Dieu in Rennes was followed by Paul, alone, and headed to the train station. Her mother's body was to be transported by train to Antibes for burial. The following day, Le Petit Journal and L'Excelsior reported that she would be buried in Lyon, but in Barcelonnette. It was believed she had been quietly placed in the grave of her first husband, Paul Jacques, whose tombstone bears the poem she wrote for him, and is crowned by the Angel of the Apocalypse.